Some skeptics will argue there's a contradiction in the properties of God, mainly that God's omniscience forms a contradiction with either his omnipotence or his moral perfection. First, the way they say God's omnipotence is in contradiction with his omniscience is if God is all-knowing, he can't change his mind, meaning there is something God can't do, therefore he can't be omnipotent. However, the problem with this is it once again assumes omnipotence means one can do anything. We've already dealt with this in a previous video, and demonstrated that omnipotence doesn't mean God can do the logically impossible. It means God is all-powerful and can do anything that is logically possible within his nature. And asking can God change his mind is the same as asking can a being that knows everything learn something new, because changing your mind is a cognitive process involving the manipulation of knowledge resulting in a different outcome. God's knowledge cannot change over time because from the very moment it exists, it is completely perfect. And the definition of omniscience entails the possession of every outcome of all possible manipulations of all possible items, instantly. Therefore, the fact that God cannot change his mind is no more a refutation of God's omnipotence than the fact that he can't learn anything new or make a square circle. Now, does God's omniscience contradict his moral perfection? Skeptics will argue if God knows everything, including the future, then he knew our entire future before it happened. Therefore, since our futures were already known, they were predestined. Therefore, God predestined evil and is the cause of evil. Therefore, God is not morally perfect. However, there are two ways to refute this. The first is to point out this results from a limited view of omniscience. God doesn't simply know the future, God knows every future. In other words, God knows every choice we will have, and every possible decision we could make, and every possible future that could result from every possible decision. But he leaves the freedom to us to decide which possibility is actualized. However, I prefer the other approach, which is that this objection results from a misunderstanding of divine omniscience. God does not predict the future from the past, but rather postdicts from the future, so to speak. God is not bound by time, so God was not sitting around one day and decided to create the universe and determine everything by already knowing what would happen. Rather, God existing outside of time actualizes all time at once. It can be said like this: the past is already known, the future is something that is unknown but has an infinite number of possibilities, and the present is the eliminator of those possibilities. God knowing the future does not determine it, as his knowledge is not a determining process from the past, but rather a knowledge that exists presently and is actualized by free will. The future for us exists as a web of possibilities, whose outcome is known by God, but not predictively from the past, but rather postdictively from the present and future. The mistake that is often made is to confuse man's understanding of his actions with the knowledge possessed by a divine being. The two are not the same, and once this is understood, this paradox is resolved. The main thing we have to remember, God being outside of time, is not bound by it the same way we are. His omniscience transcends a state of time and is not stuck in the past.